Thank you all for being here. It's terrific to see you. And this is our first kickoff for this QUT Center for Data Science in 2024 program discussion. I'd like to begin with a brief acknowledgement of country and acknowledge that we are on the unceded lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people. And these places have been continuous places of teaching, learning, and research for many, many thousands of years. And we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Thanks. All right. So this is being recorded because it's going to be a publicly facing discussion about the Responsible Data Science and AI program. I'd like to, for the benefit of those listening, briefly introduce the Center for Data Science and the vision of the data science. This center is to be a national and a global leader in the development of frontier methods for the use of data to benefit our world. So in today's talk, each of the co-leaders are going to talk a little bit about, introduce ourselves and talk about what we're involved in. And maybe we'll just begin with introductions. Aaron, may I just have you introduce yourself, and then we'll go a little bit more into it.
Hi to everyone online and in the room as well. My name is Aaron Snoswell. I am a research fellow, soon to be senior research fellow here at QUT, and I work in AI accountability. So my background is in engineering, a PhD in computer science. And I now work on a range of different things, but my primary research is in language model, bias evaluation and mitigation, as well as other types of generative models. And that includes XAI stuff and sort of policy and how to govern and regulate these models as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chun, and I'm an associate professor from School of the Information Systems. I'm very happy to be on board with Bernadette and Aaron to be a co-leader of this program. So my background and my interest is in explainable AI. And I have a team working on the very technical aspect of explainable AI and looking at different technical solutions and capabilities to address explainability throughout the data science and machine learning pipeline, starting from understanding what data we have and what data suitable to use for the particular predictive problems, and also decide what the data representation that we can use and pick the technique, and then generate explanations that is ideally understandable for humans. Of course, along the pipeline, as Famali and Maithri mentioned before, that there are black box models, there are models that we don't have access to, and then there are, of course, models designed with very sophisticated like the infrastructure architecture. So there are various techniques that we can look at, and we also want to understand with various techniques what are the strengths and weaknesses, so that we can make recommendations of what to choose and why do we choose and pick different techniques.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. And my name, for any of you who I haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting, is Bernadette Highland Wood. I have a long career in working with the scholarly research community on the industry side of things, and worked on things like persistent identifiers and connecting disparate sources of large data sets. And right here in Brisbane, back in the early noughts, developed the first commercially supported graph database in the world based on an international data standard. Of course, most of us are familiar that graph databases are part of a suite of technologies and algorithms that are used within any kind of recommender system, be it Netflix or online shopping, to many other things. And then the infrastructure that we all benefit from around persistent identifiers, such as DOIs that we include in our bibliographies. I was very involved in the architecture of that on the web. And then later in life, did my PhD in my 50s, and now teach in the School of Communication here at QUT, and I'm involved as a co-leader with Chun and Aaron in the program for Responsible Data Science and AI. And my particular area of my current research focus is on Indigenous data governance and policies related to safe and responsible AI. I have a PhD in policy, and my whole work career, however, in undergraduate was in software engineering in Silicon Valley and Brisbane. So with that, I just will go back to the Center for Data Science and talk about just three of the flagship projects within the center. That is the Australian Data Science Network, which is comprised of roughly, is it 20 or 30?
More than 30.
More than 30
Wow.
industry, government, and university partners. And Tim was recently hosting the 2023 UN Datathon here, where we brought together researchers from all around the country. We paired up in teams. One of the teams, of which there were 400 around the world, one of the teams came in second and had a member from the Center for Data Science, second in the world on an international, very competitive, challenge. So that was very exciting. We're very involved with industry collaborations, and perhaps the thing that's near and dear to my heart is training world-class students, researchers, and practitioners, really emphasizing a culture, and I emphasize that word, culture, of collaborative training. So we're very fortunate to be here and to have this program. So the kind of overarching goals of the program are to promote world-class data science research, and importantly, active external engagement on the use of safe and responsible AI. Aaron's going to speak to that in a minute, and then serve as a bridge. Aaron and I are both part of a couple of other QUT Tier 1 centers, as well as the ARC Center of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society, which is a 5-year program, and we're in the middle of that 5-year cycle, and other national communities of practice, industry, and government partners. So we very much want to work with our external industry and government partners. I think it's a great opportunity for HDR students to have exposure to this, because in the area of computer science and engineering, the smallest number of the graduates go into academia. The majority of us go into government, industry, starting our own businesses, working for international companies. So beginning to understand what the opportunities are through internships, guest lectures, just getting used to networking is a really good practice, right? In other disciplines, more people who graduate with PhDs go into academia in some capacity, but not so the stats don't support that in engineering. So those are our kind of overarching goals. Our co-leadership team is the three of us. If you want to go on to the next one, next slide. We have 3 core initiatives at this point, which include putting together some podcasts, some high quality, well-produced podcasts with Tim McCouga's assistance. And hopefully, if they're good enough, he'll accept them as entrants for the random sample, which has an existing audience base. And there'll be various aspects of regulation and AI and various dimensions of that. So we have some speakers in mind. We want to showcase our ECRs, HDRs, ECRs, along with maybe a kind of a recognized expert in the area. And it's a conversation between a co-leader from the program and the an ECR and a senior person. That's our hope. And if we get 3 or 4 of them done this year, we'll be very, very happy. So if anybody has any great ideas or great recommendations for speakers, please let us know.
Or you'd like to volunteer.
Or you'd like to volunteer. And we have a few of you in mind that we're going to tap on the shoulder. And then the next big thing is helping to build capacity with our industry partners to co-deliver training for internal capacity building around responsible and safe AI, right? So we feel that we have an obligation to go out to industry and government and work with them and help on this, because we can't just defer and say, hey, someday government's going to regulate that and everything will be better. Anybody who's familiar with regulation knows that's a very long road. It takes 8 or 10 years. And right now, industry and government is looking to academic institutions and experts in this area to give them some guidance. And again, Aaron will talk to that in a minute. And then one of the things that Aaron and I have been busy with is responding to RFIs and requests of the various QUT Tier 1 centers and centers of excellence for recommendations and guidance. Everybody and their dog is talking about generative AI right now, and everybody wants some guidance. And I would say everyone and their dog is talking about it, often not knowing what they're talking about. So we have a lot of chops here at QUT, and so the idea is to get the people who know what they're talking about front and center on everything from internal talks to Q&A. I just saw a couple of weeks ago, there was a Q&A on on AI, featuring Professor Toby Walsh and a few other experts. So that's our goal. Those are the core initiatives. Do either of you want to add anything to the initiative section?
I'll just say, so I literally just talked about this morning, but I want to talk to PhD students in particular about, I understand maybe there's a reading group or sharing papers sort of casually as a group. It would be great, I think, to sort of foster, or maybe I'd love to join in with that if you're doing it already around explainable AI papers and sort of getting like a regular catch up. That'd be good. Someone shares a paper and just talks about, here's a cool recent paper I saw and here's sort of what it's doing in this space. To just myself, I know that in the past has helped me keep abreast of what's happening in a rapidly evolving field. So yeah, I'll talk to you all afterwards about that. But that's another thing I'm keen on, perhaps being part of this year.
Great, thanks. Let's go to the next slide.
I might just have,
Yeah,
I think just as Bernadette popped in, and I think it would also be, because I think that's also built on Bernadette's extensive network with the industry government bodies, where there's, would that be a good idea to have some like roundtable discussions with industry partners, start from, not have to be official and formal, formal, but we can have some informal discussions, have a roundtable discussions, and then with these industry bodies that they're interested in.
Well, hopefully the resources that we provide will begin to cultivate a sense of various industry groups that exist already, to recognize us at the center to come to. In other words, right now we need kind of identifiable people, names, email addresses, a telephone number, so that people in industry or government say, we're having a panel, you know, could you help us find one or two people knowledgeable? And then we get known. Then when we have some clout and cachet, we can maybe conduct a roundtable. Yeah, because there are lots of projects like the survey of the AI hub on what's the capability of an understanding of responsible and safe AI within Queensland-based entities. Cool. All right. So
Bernadette, can I ask a question?
Sure. Hi, Aidan.
Hi. These RFIs.
Yeah.
What?
Introduce yourself, mate.
Yeah. Hi. I'm a research associate working at the Centre for Data Science. I'm in the government systems domain, and I do a bunch of work in child health data and environmental health. Yeah, I'm super interested in communication of research outputs and connection with industry and partners generally. But I'm interested in the RFIs that you mentioned. The opportunities, or I guess questions that come out. What are some examples of those that you've specifically noticed that you think like, the responsible AI like program can really jump on that?
That's a great question, Aidan, and Aaron is going to speak to exactly that. So thank you very much.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. I'll just finish up and say he's going to talk about some specifics and show you some that we've already worked on in 2023. But in particular, this slide is a little more condensed than the next one, which Aaron's going to show, and that is some core groups that I know are actively working in this space include Department of Industry, Science and Resources, the Office of the National Data Commissioner, which was instrumental in the formation of the Data Act 2021, DATA, Data Accountability and Transparency Act, and then the Australian Information Commissioner. And then there are some partners at a national and international level that we already have really good relationships with, including the Indigenous Data Network, based out of Uni Melbourne Indigenous Studies Unit, that I work quite closely with, and ANZOG, Australian New Zealand School of Governance, that hosted the First Peoples to All Peoples conference in March of 2023. Very, very interested in data policy, use of data, and all the things that Chun works on around representativeness of data, bias in data, et cetera. And then the UK Open Data Institute, which runs a professional data ethics program. I just took that as a 60-hour program, and they very much want to get Pacific and Asia and Pacific perspectives on good data governance. So this is my plug. Why participate in this program? Be you an HDR or early career researcher or industry itself, so that we can ultimately have an increased impact on applied research and policy during what I consider one of the most disruptive periods of human history. And I was there. I'm old enough to have been there in the early days of the web. which was pretty cool. And I knew it was pretty disruptive. And I think this is an order of magnitude. And I know I don't say that, and I know these people almost understand what an order of magnitude is.
Mhm.
That disruptive to human society. And we have a privilege of being in a data, a well-respected Center for Data Science, backed by distinguished Professor Kerry Mangerson, to really have some impact. And people use that word a lot, but I think we genuinely can and should be engaging and having that impact. And you guys are all doing amazing work. I'm incredibly impressed when I hear you describe what you're doing. So we are the future. Okay,
Yeah.
and over to Aaron with some specifics, Aidan, to your question about where we're thinking of having impact and where we've already done a bit of submissions.
Yeah. Yes, thanks for the question, Aidan. I'll just, before I move on the slide, second what Bernadette said, so why considered contributing to a government call for input? There's at least two reasons. One is really selfish. As an academic, a lot of our life is driven by metrics. It's just the nature of the job and the game. And it's a pretty straightforward way to produce an academic output that does actually get tracked and is sort of part of your portfolio as an academic of work you've produced. And then on the actual sort of more important side, I think, is the impact. So I'm fairly early in my career, but I've actually found that doing this sort of work and writing submissions to government has actually been some of the most rewarding work I've done personally. And I'll give you an example of that in a moment. It's really cliche that it feels like you're actually making a difference when you suggest something, then someone in the government actually takes a notice of that. That's actually pretty important, I think, and a pretty cool feeling as well.
And it comes back in a press release.
Yeah, I'll point that out in a moment. So yeah, just following on, there's lots of people in Australia and internationally as well that work in this sort of space and sort of are asking for input around responsible data science and AI, or responding to these sort of calls. These are some of the institutes that we have in Australia on the left, government groups in the middle, and then also international bodies as well that are sort of in this space. Some of the names might be familiar to you, some of them might not be. But just wanted to highlight, we're not alone here. There's lots of other players. To give an example then of what this can look like. So as Bernadette mentioned, I'm part of the ADMS Centre, the Automated Decision Making and Society Centres. This is about 9 universities across Australia, funded several $1 million for a number of years with researchers all across Australia, all working on automated decision making and sort of how it affects society and regulation, and go through from technical aspects to cultural and social aspects. Last year, I had the privilege of being involved in this process where basically ChatGPT came out, right, and sort of shook everything up a little bit. Everyone started scrambling, trying to figure out what the heck does this mean for me and my industry and my work and my sphere of life. The Office of the Chief Scientist of Australia, sort of working with the Minister for Technology, Industry and Science, Ed Husic, they wanted to quickly find out what was going on. What did this new technology mean? Was it actually new? What's the history? What's been going on? So they commissioned a report on generative AI and foundation models, the buzzword there. And so that was sort of like a request for quote that went out across universities across Australia. I was part of a team from QUT and a few other universities that was selected for that project. And so we produced what's called a rapid research information report, which is this about 50 or so pages, produced really quickly, really intensive work over a couple of weeks, then several weeks of iteration, did peer review through a bunch of other experts around Australia, and basically then was handed over to the Chief Scientist of Australia, who then walked into lots of cabinet and parliamentary meetings with this report saying, here's the deal. Here's what this technology means. Here's what it's likely to mean for Australia. Obviously, these questions are hard to answer. It's always hard to predict what happens with technology, but to be part of that process was really special and quite impactful, I think, and rewarding for me. What followed on from that then was, on the screen here, I'm showing a screenshot of the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, read that report, produced their own sort of response to that. That was their response to this information, and then put out a call for further input. So they had a wider call for, okay, we've got an idea of what's happening now, what this technology might mean. We want to actually talk to stakeholders from all across Australia, all sorts of areas of society. So they had this call for input on responsible AI and how to support that in Australia. Had this discussion paper. And again, I was part of the ADMS's submission to that. So we wrote a second document now that was sort of, after they had the base sort of details established in the first report, now it's okay, what do we do policy-wise? What's the recommendations? What should we be implementing legally? What should we aim for? What kind of regulatory models in Australia? And so if you'd asked me a few years ago, you know, what would I ever consider participating in this sort of a process, I would have said no, because I don't feel qualified to. I'm not a lawyer, right? Like, what do I know about law and regulation? It's really cool working with lawyers, for example, at ADMS, who are used to working with computer scientists, because they made it really easy. Like, there's a colleague of mine, and she just said, like, just send me an email and tell me, what do you think governance model should look like? Like, just in plain text, don't worry about legalese, just like what makes sense, what wouldn't make sense. And so as a computer scientist, I was able to just say, oh, I think we need to have this or this or this. This doesn't make much sense technically, like literally just a couple of bullet points. And then she massaged that into legalese and like the talk that the government sort of expect to see in these kind of documents. But this report ended up being, again, about 50 pages, our submission to this second stage. And of that, I helped write 1 or 2 pages, sort of was a key contributor in those sections. So what happened then, that all gets submitted, they got several hundred submissions, I think.
500.
500. And so they sit there and mull over that. Side note, someone from the government was saying just this week that they're starting to use generative AI to try and process those responses, which is a whole other kettle of fish.
Yeah.
But the cool thing about this was a few weeks later, they did a press conference, right, that had time to go over some of the responses. And the Minister for Industry and Science, Ed Husic, specifically called out the ADMS submissions, that this was a really, really helpful submission, and actually quoted a few snippets from that report. And one of them was one of the pieces I wrote. I had written about the importance of watermarking in generative AI. I can talk to why that's important technically later if anyone's interested, but I believe that's an important thing that Australia should implement. And he actually sort of almost verbatim had said 1 or 2 lines that I'd written to that report. And so that was really cool. And then following that, the department has now released the government's interim response. This isn't like long-term laws. This is just like the next step for Australia while they work on more legislation. And part of that interim response is there's 3 responses that the government's going to put forwards to high-risk AI applications, and one of them is watermarking being recommended, or similar technological approaches.
Yeah.
And so I know that that's not just
yesterday.
Sorry,
I just read about that yesterday.
Yeah. So that's not just coming from me, right? There would have been hundreds of people that had called for the same thing in this process, but to have my voice heard and to actually get a chance to sort of say, no, this is what makes sense technically. From my perspective, and then work with other people from other disciplines to actually suggest something and have the government listen and perhaps even do something about it. That was really rewarding for me. So then another example closer to home here at the CDS. So late last year, we put out a call for people to help out with a response to the G7 have these guiding principles for organizations developing advanced AI systems. This in a draft late last year, and they were calling for input again. So I put a call out within the Centre and had a bunch of people respond, including Bamali, who's actually in the room here today. And it was actually, I hope you found like quite an easy process. Like the response was quite short. We just had to sort of respond to a couple of questions and then share some thoughts around a couple of key points. So yeah, again, a very easy process. This was like a couple of questions to respond to, then like some free text to share more further thoughts about what makes sense technically around these guiding principles. So this is the kind of thing that we'll be looking to do more of. The process for this, we're going to figure it out going forwards, but I've got a list of international and domestic bodies that regularly call for input. I'm probably going to peruse that once a fortnight or so. I'll try and condense that. I looked again this morning and there's about 15 or 20 possible submissions we could do that might be relevant for people in the centre. So I'll try and sort of do some triage and some curation to avoid blasting everyone with a bajillion emails. But yeah, we'll be sharing those opportunities through the email distribution lists. And yeah, if you're interested, that's something that anyone can do if you're HDR or a professor or anything like that.
Right. And I just want to reiterate, your supervisors may tell you something different, but I am I think in the field of computer science in particular, working notes, recommendations for standards bodies, submissions are actually quite impactful. And so to Aaron's point, I too did one on data supply during COVID-19, a non-commissioned independent report over Easter of April of 2020. And then it was 1 month. I was very junior. I was working with very senior people, and about 40 of us were focused on this report. And then it got in early May brought to the National Cabinet and the Prime Minister on COVID-19 and how should Australia respond. So they're very, very satisfying. They can be very quick turn and burn. So one thing to set expectations, if you're asked to contribute, usually the time frame is quite brief. Like you have 2 weeks, max kind of thing. Maybe you're lucky if you heard about it early and it's a month, but by the time Aaron sees it and triages it and we put a team together, et cetera, oftentimes it's pretty you might be working on the weekends or nights. But the point is, they're very rewarding, and then they get put up. If it's a government submission, you have the opportunity to put your name. You typically you don't put contact details. That's masked, and then it goes up on the government's website. And it's actually a good way for future employers prospectively to find out who's got expertise in something. So it's nice to be named on, you know, something like this. And you might receive a phone call and outreach because they're looking for people with expertise. And I do know industry right now is very much trying to figure out what are we going to do about this. And in the next, call it 6 to 12 months, really be looking to universities for assistance on this topic.
It builds your profile not just in terms of metrics, but also in terms of exposure to journalism and journalists,
that's
media
true.
organizations and industry.
Yeah.
And just another note on impact. It's funny, when I was writing out these slides, this report that we prepared, which is just like a summary of our response, if you actually search for the G7 guiding principles for organizations, blah, 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 we're actually a higher hit on Google and Bing right now than the actual draft guiding principles, which is, I've done absolutely no promotion whatsoever, but I find that pretty hilarious.
Yeah.
But
your results might be different, right?
I tried it in incognito windows and
oh, really?
Yeah,
truly? Oh, you did? So you controlled for that. Cool.
Anyway,
that's really cool. All right.
That's enough for me.
Well, there are our details. Chun, did you want to add anything to the thoughts on, you know,
I think
where we're headed?
As an academic working most of the time in the more technical solution, the way how we feel our work rewarding is usually, I think is usually looking at the, the solution builder, maybe the vendors, this more technology kind of like body of stakeholders. And I think my other side of work was, business process mining is we can then tap into the business stakeholders. But I think as Bernadette and Aaron just mentioned, the government bodies, regulation, this has not been like on our common I think industry audience that we have ever think that we can make our work and research findings impactful. And I think this is really opening, I think, our eyes and opening another channel, and for us to really think about how to, bring our work to be impactful or at least influential to those government bodies, regulation policies. I think this is really exciting to me. Yeah.
So I think with that, we should perhaps end the recorded portion, and then we can have a discussion amongst ourselves on what research people are doing.